Today we're talking about autism and sleep. Very often parents of autistic children report that their children are having difficulties sleeping. Some children find very hard to fall asleep while others wake up during the night. They may wake up very early in the morning or have nightmares. So today I have invited an autism consultant to talk to us about that and help us to give our children a better rest at night. Laura Crowley is a mother, lecturer, autism consultant, and a sleep practitioner. Laura also has a diagnosis of autism. She has recently created the Connect to Sleep program for parents of children with additional needs. I have invited Laura here today to learn more about why autistic children are more likely to have sleep difficulties and, most importantly, how we can help them to sleep at night. Welcome to today's interview. Hi Laura, how are you?
Hi Silvia.
Hello. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm delighted that you're here today. We're going to talk about a very important topic, sleep, and how to help children with additional needs to sleep, to have a better sleep. I'm delighted that you're here.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Thank you. Laura, I wanted to talk to you because, as you know, I work with families of parents of children with disabilities. And one common problem that I see with parents of autistic children is they say that their children have difficulties sleeping. Either some children have difficulties falling asleep and it takes a long time, children that wake up during the night, kids that wake up at 4 a.m. and stay awake all day. And I find that often we give parents general advice on sleeping, but that advice may not actually help them and solve their problems. So that's why I'm so excited that you're here today. We're going to talk about how to support autistic children have a better sleep. So Laura, I would like to understand a little bit more about sleeping problems in autistic children. How common are sleep difficulties with autistic children?
So one of the largest studies that has been done in recent years was in 2019, and that showed that approximately 80% of children on the autistic spectrum will experience sleep difficulties at some point, whether that be for a prolonged period or a shorter period, but 80%, and they're twice more likely to experience sleep difficulties than children with other developmental difficulties or additional needs. So it's a huge proportion.
And are these difficulties the same for children with developmental delays, such as Down syndrome, for example, or other developmental delays? Are there differences?
So I think every different developmental delay will have its own set of particular difficulties around sleep. But for instance, if we take, Down syndrome, children with Down syndrome are about 50% of them, I think is the statistic, will suffer with sleep apnea. And that can look like restless sleep, sweating at night, snoring, disordered breathing, and sometimes they stop breathing for a short time. So that kind of has its own difficulties. And then if you look at ADHD, with the medication that's prescribed with ADHD, it's often a stimulant, and that can again reduce sleep. So every different diagnosis has its own separate set of difficulties. So they're all kind of unique in ways to the individual, but also there are some shared commonalities between them as well.
I see. And that's probably why it makes it more difficult when we give general advice on sleep. That's why sometimes it doesn't work, because children's needs may be so different from one another that we really need to look at what are the needs and if there's any medical issues. So we need to look at each child individually.
Exactly.
Before we talk about sleeping problems, I would like to know, Laura, what is considered a sleep problem? Because I know that we are not all different. Whereas my husband falls asleep in 2 minutes, it can take me an hour to fall asleep. Okay. So what is considered a sleep problem?
Okay, so I think it's really important to understand that a sleep problem for one person is not necessarily a sleep problem for another person. So bed sharing for one person is completely normal. For another person, it's going to be a problem that they can't extinguish, that they can't really kind of control. A sleep problem is only a problem when it impacts your quality of life and your child's quality of life. So it's really important to understand that. For some people, they breastfeed, well beyond the age of 2, and that's not a problem for them. And it doesn't, even though they're up more in the night, it's not a problem for them. So sleep problems really are when it's affecting your quality of life or the quality of life of your child. So it's a very individual thing. But some difficulties like nightmares and night terrors, like early waking is one. Like a friend of mine, we always joke about it. Like my kids wake at 6 a.m. on the button. It's like an alarm went off. My friend is like, oh, my child woke so early this morning. She was awake at 8. And I'm looking at her going, yeah, that's not early, So for her, that's a sleep problem. For me, that's a lion. So we really have to look at it in terms of the individual and in terms of circumstances, around the individual.
And what are the consequences of not having a good sleep? And I suppose, what are the consequences? Now we're talking about children, so what are the consequences for them? Because I hear very often parents saying the kids are awake during the night, or they may stay awake for hours during the night, and in the morning they feel full of energy.
Okay. So firstly, I think it's important to point out that some people need longer sleep and some people need shorter sleep naturally. Okay. So for instance, in this house, my husband needs less sleep. I need more sleep. If I don't get 7 hours sleep a night, I'm grumpy. It has an effect on my whole day, right? So that's true for kids as well as for adults. However, if you have a child that is experiencing less sleep than they developmentally need, even if they are needing less sleep than the typical person, and if they're getting less sleep than that again, there is huge knock-on effects. So we see an increase in a lot of behavioral problems, concentration problems, even social interaction skills, because obviously for those on the spectrum, social interaction takes an awful lot more thought process, more energy, more just more concentration than it does for the general population. We also see an increase in rituals and routines. And this one I find really interesting because the studies say that there are rituals and routines of no consequence, right? So they don't seem to serve a purpose. Now, as an autistic adult myself, I can tell you routines will always, always serve a purpose for the individual. And it's likely that these children are so tired and so lacking in sleep that these routines are bringing sensory comfort to them. So that's providing, like when I'm really exhausted, that's when I reach for my sensory comforts, my scented candles, my weighted blanket, my chewing gum for the eyes TV, stuff that I already know the consequences of, like movies that I've watched before, shows that Friends, for instance, I'll watch Friends, warm tea. So these are all the sensory comforts I go to, and I have my routine around that. So it's really interesting to see I would love to look more into that and see what they meant by that. But there are so many long-reaching implications of less sleep. And not only are we seeing the outward implications of it, but inwardly for the child, we have lack of concentration, which causes a lack of, ability to concentrate on what they're learning. So it's going to impact their learning. It's going to impact their social development. It's going to impact on almost every aspect of their lives. If we're getting less REM sleep, especially, that's our dream sleep. That's where we process the day, we process what went on. So that kind of sleep is really, really important. Our non-REM sleep is going to be helping us to relax the system and rebuild the system. And if that's not happening, then there's strain on our internal system. So the effects are so long-reaching and so vast and wide. And it's interesting you said that, parents are seeing kids who are full of energy the next morning. One of the ways in which we show we're overtired is by that burst of energy. So it may be not that the children are rested and are full of beans, it's that they're just getting a second wind and they're actually exhausted, that they're overtired. If you go past that sleepy phase, you go into overtiredness and your body just kind of gives you a burst to try and get you through the next period. So that's when you'll find it harder to sleep and you're using more energy that you don't have.
So Laura, what you're saying is very, very interesting. So that makes me think that very often actually parents and teachers could communicate more, because you're telling me that when a child has had maybe a bad night, that he or she woke up during the night, that probably if in the school we were aware that that has happened, you're telling me that by having routines, that anyway routines should be in place, but actually by that the child may on that particular day need more routines or more comfort, although we may not seeing it, the child may not be able to express that that's what they need. But if the teachers knew that the child didn't have a good sleep, that they would be more aware of giving comfort to the child to be able to function better on that day. That's really interesting.
And also to pull back on the academic work as well, just pull things back a little bit, not do anything new and big and really taxing for them, just to pull back their work a little bit if they haven't had a good night.
I would like to understand a little bit more why sleeping difficulties are more common for autistic people.
Okay, so there's lots of reasons really. So if we look at, I suppose, autistic people will have differences in their sensory systems. So we have differences around our sight and sound and smell and all those things. And if we have difficulties at night, these can lead to us, we say even for instance, the simplest thing as the sleeping environment and whether your sheets are comfortable, whether they're the right texture for your sensory system, all those little things. So that immediate sleep environment has to satisfy your sensory needs. And then also our proprioceptive systems and our vestibular systems, if they're out of whack at sleep time, then your body isn't regulated and you're not going to be able to go into a restful sleep. So for instance, anybody who follows me on Instagram will have seen my daughter goes into a swing a lot of nights, and she swings herself so fast it nearly, it makes me dizzy just looking at her, but she sleeps like a log after those spins, because that satisfies her sensory system and she's totally regulated going to sleep. So what would be good for me and what are good for her are different things. So the sensory is just one element of it. Then a lot of people on the spectrum will suffer with digestive issues. So I'm one of them. And I have always had that. So you may have, stomach pain, constipation or diarrhea. Any of those things can impact how you sleep and how your body relaxes at night. So that's another one. I think as well, there's medications that are associated as well for comorbid conditions and different bits and pieces, like coexisting conditions like maybe ADHD or any other real conditions, epilepsy. They can impact sleep. People on the spectrum, they're saying about 40% of people on the spectrum will experience anxiety. I think right now with the pandemic, we're looking at 70 to 80%. This is, I suppose, anecdotal from my own experience, but with anxiety, and that's my biggest sleep problem is anxiety, is switching off at night. I can wake at 3 a.m. with an intrusive thought, and that can build and ruminate, and that's one of my biggest sleep problems. I used to be a sleepwalker. I used to suffer from nightmares, but my biggest thing at the moment, I suppose, is anxiety. And I'm still, even at 41, I'm still working on that myself. So, and then if you are suffering with anxiety, there's about 50% of those who suffer with anxiety will also suffer with depression. So you have, whether it's the depression caused the sleep issues or the sleep issues caused the depression, or, it's kind of a, what came first, the chicken or the egg? So there's so many differences and so many difficulties. And then on top of that, there is studies that suggest that people on the spectrum produce less melatonin, and we have, I suppose, genetic differences that prevent melatonin being produced in the body. And melatonin is, like, we call it the hormone of darkness. So it helps to set your circadian rhythm and get you to sleep at a certain time when the sun goes down, and that's what we're going to be getting. So if you've less of that, you're not going to start to feel sleepy when you're supposed to. So there's lots and lots of reasons.
I see, and it's so important, isn't it, that we understand, even as you're talking, my son, my eldest son, who's 12, he's autistic, and even now that you were talking about anxiety, I remember last night there was something bothering him, and we had to have a conversation, and then I realized he needed to resolve that. I was like, we'll talk about it tomorrow, and he couldn't sleep, and then I realized he needs to have this conversation. He wants to resolve that. It was something small for me, but it was very important for him. He needed an answer to something, and I can see that worry. He couldn't sleep.
A lot of the time, things that cause anxiety to us seem obscure. Okay, so one of my biggest triggers for anxiety at night is rain. To others, it seems like a lovely sound on the window. To me, it makes my anxiety go through the roof. And I'm working through that at the moment. So the biggest piece of advice I'd give is no matter how obscure it seems to you, to your child, it's actually a very big fear. So we have to treat it as such and not try and minimize it, because that makes the child feel that there's something wrong with them. That, I shouldn't be scared of this and I'm terrified. And I think what you did, you acknowledged that he needs to get this out of his system. So I'd always recommend kind of worry time, but keep it further away from bedtime. But if they are saying it at bedtime, then get a pen and piece of paper, draw it out or write it out, and then get them ripping it up, and it's gone until the morning, and we can throw it in the bin, or you can shred it even if you have a shredder at home. So something that's a very visual representation of that thought is now gone. Okay, we can settle. And then providing auditory input to block out the output, if you get me. So rather than your thoughts going around in your head, if you're listening to input, it stops the rumination. So that's one of my biggest things that I use. I use sleep music. And like we have a Tony's box in my daughter's room, because my youngest is actually suffering with a lot of nighttime anxiety, and the Tony's box is brilliant because it just plays her favorite stories, and that's that input to stop the rumination and stop the constant worrying in her head.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that, because recently we got a sound machine and we're using it and he loves it, and that's what I was thinking. That's probably blocking. It gives him something to listen to.
Yep.
And it really, really helps. Fantastic. And I know, Laura, I'm very excited about your new program, Connect to Sleep. I'm very excited because we had a sleeping problem. Sebastian, when he was little, for the first 5 years of his life, he woke up every 2 hours every single night. And the impact on that for all the family, for himself, for ourselves as parents, and I'm thinking for myself as a mom, over the years, then the consequences of that, health issues and mental health issues. So when I heard that you were starting your program, Connect to Sleep, I was so excited, because I don't want other families to go through that. I know that there's no magic wand where we can solve the problems overnight, but the fact that you're offering a container to inform parents and support parents, it's really, really important. So Laura, can you tell us a little bit more about the program? First of all, who's the program for? Okay. Is it just for parents of children, of autistic children? Is it open to children with additional needs? Tell me a little bit, who is the program for?
So the program is made specifically for parents with children with additional needs. Yes, with autistic children, but all additional needs. And I include anxiety in that because I think anxiety is particularly an additional need when it comes to nighttime. Because at nighttime, everything goes quiet and all of your distractions are gone. And that's when anxiety really comes to the fore. So it's for parents because, and I suppose my journey with sleep started nearly 5 years ago now, when my eldest, Big Boss, as she is affectionately known, I have Big Boss and Small Boss. Big Boss was born and didn't sleep. And the impact of that for me now, I ended up with severe postnatal anxiety because the crying, especially from a sensory perspective, really, really affected me. And she would cry like your son every 2 hours, screaming the house down. And I used to spend 2-3 hours in the evening in a dark room trying to settle her while she screamed. And I suppose knowing now that she is neurodivergent and she has sensory processing disorder and she is also autistic, had I known that then, it would have been much easier. But I went looking for sleep help and I found generic sleep programs. I found generic help, which did not suit my daughter, which did not give me any help, which made me just incredibly anxious because it wasn't working. And I blamed myself because I was saying, it must be me, it must be the way I'm doing it. So I became passionate about sleep at that point. Now, it became clear that Big Boss was neurodivergent when she was probably, I knew from kind of 6 weeks that there was something, and I suspected autism, but at 21 months, we were really certain. So we started really treating her as if she had sensory issues. And I was looking at her and catering to those issues. Even though they weren't confirmed, I was making an educated guess, I suppose. And I'm very privileged in that respect because of my training. And the minute we started paying heed to her sensory needs, we saw an improvement in sleep. The minute I started putting in routines that she could, she knew the sequence, that paid a dividend with her sleep. And then she was still waking during the night, so we worked on self-settling. We used other aids like weighted blankets and all those kind of things. So my journey with sleep started personally with my own sleep issues with my daughter, and now my other daughter is experiencing nightmares. We're working through that and nighttime anxiety. So I became passionate about studying it. I went back to college last year, and I was so lucky. I studied with the sleep charity in the UK, and the reason I chose that course is I got to study with an associated hospital, which gave us access to physiotherapists, occupational therapists, neurologists who are giving us these lectures about how to understand every aspect of sleep. So it's not just about, children should go to sleep at this time, and not giving generic one size fits all approaches. And that was why I was passionate. So I sat down after the training and I said, right, how can I bring this to families so it's accessible, so it gives them all the information to make decisions for themselves that are individual to their family. And the one thing I was really passionate about is that this would be a safe space and a non-judgmental space, because I found that in my previous experience, when I looked for help in the sleep community that I had bought into, I was shamed for not following the program well enough, and I wasn't given that support. And when I left, I was actually branded kind of a mood bringer downer in the group, and it was really affected me. So I was passionate that when I made this space, it would be non-judgmental, it would be safe space. If parents wanted to come in and had a 9-year-old who they were still lying down with to settle to sleep, then that was okay. No matter what was brought to the group, then they would be met with open arms, and we would say, okay, it's now a problem for you. It worked all along for you. Let's see what we can do about it. So I didn't want to do just a one-off. So I've created the program to last 4 weeks. It's intensive in that at the start, just before you start, you're given a welcome email. You're asked to fill out a form about your child, so that I'll get the forms just as I would if I was doing, private sleep consultancy. And I will really take in, okay, what are the common issues in this group, so that I can tailor our kind of lessons as well to that. Now, there is a broad structure, but I can tailor it. So if there's a common issue, I can spend more time on that. It's a small group. And then each week we meet on Zoom and we have a specific topic. Like the first week, for instance, is just all about sleep and letting parents understand sleep. So for instance, one thing that people don't understand, they think people, that you go to sleep and you stay asleep. That's actually not true. As adults, we wake up frequently during the night as well. It's just that we have this self-settling to be able to turn over and go back to sleep, whereas children may not have learned that yet. So it's knowing that that's actually a natural part of the sleep cycle and how we kind of go about it. And then we move on, we cover sensory, we cover anxiety, we cover all of those things as well. And then we look at all of the bigger methodologies that you can use. So what I want is that parents have a really educated standpoint, so that at the end of the 4 weeks, they no longer need me. They don't need me to set out a sleep program for them, because they have all of the information that they need in their resource pack. They have everything done, and they're going to make their own sleep plan. And then after that, they have access to the private Facebook group where they can ask questions if they need to. They can get support from like-minded parents, and that's a constant support for them then after that.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. And again, I wish I had it years ago. And is there an age limit? Like you were giving an example there of a 9-year-old. Have you thought of that? Is there an age limit?
So it goes from 3. So the youngest is 3, but because of, I suppose that's the age around where people are acknowledging those additional needs. And we can work all the way up into the teens, but adults wouldn't be covered in the program, but it's from 3 to teenage years.
And I suppose like people can contact you if they are not so sure if that's for them.
Yeah.
They can, yeah.
You know, I want people to be able to do it at their own pace. So they'll be given the information and decide what's best for their family, what's going to work for them and what they're comfortable with as well. I think that's really important, that I'm not telling them you need to do this, this, this and this, and it needs to be in this time frame, because I'm very cognizant that with additional needs, we do have times where we take a step back for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so I don't want it to be that fixed, but yes, it's for any child with any additional needs.
And I love the fact that we are very conscious that there's no magic wand. We're not going to solve it overnight, because I think that leads to frustration, that you can do the right thing, it just takes a little bit more time, and that's totally okay. And I think once we understand that, people can work through that without the anxiety, I'm doing something wrong, this is not working for me. As long as you keep working on it and you keep seeing progress and you keep supporting your child. Tell me,
and
when
I think it's good to acknowledge as well that it's okay to take a step back. It's okay if that happens, because that's life. You know, we're not always moving forward. Sometimes things do go wrong and we have to take a step back. Someone gets sick, you know, or, jobs get busy or whatever it may be. We may have to take a step back, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I'm thinking change, I'm thinking holidays. Sometimes when we go on holidays, that's another issue. But if people have the tools and they know, okay, so something has happened, something has changed, but I know how I can continue supporting my child. When does the program start, and are you planning to run this on an ongoing basis?
So the program will start in March 11th, Thursday, March 11th, I think is the first Zoom session. But yes, it will run again, likely towards the end of the year. I will probably run 2 groups in a year. It's quite intensive. The groups are very limited in space, and I just want to make sure that I can give it everything it needs. So running it twice a year rather than running it back to back is, for me, I think that's most advantageous, because it gives us time to settle the Facebook groups as well for their support needs, and that's really, really important to me. So I would say the second group will probably run in October maybe, but right now the only one in this half of the year is March.
Okay, and where can people find you?
So people can find more information on www.connectautismconsultancy.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. This was very informative, and I invite everyone to check the Connect to Sleep program. And I'm delighted that you were here today giving us so much information. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you, Silvia.